I also think very interestingly, what we have seen and why, in our view, is so important to talk about debt literacy or financial literacy is what we see in the debt instrument, certainly with credit card, and I think very similarly with the subprime mortgages. I describe them a little bit like an open faucet. What we have done with the credit card and more so with the subprime mortgages, we have kind of opened this faucet and told people, you know, you can withdraw water, it's up to you to close it. But we are here and we are willing to give you credit, which means that the decisions about how much to borrow and draw for that faucet is increasingly onto the consumer. And that's why it's so important that consumers make these decisions and they have tools to make these decisions. And so there is kind of this similarity, I think, between credit card and subprime mortgages, while in the past, banks used to look at some of their balance sheet. Once you look at debt and once you look at financial decision per se, I think it becomes a lot more difficult to be effective in doing regulation. And also it becomes a lot more difficult to choose an appropriate choice architecture. And again, one example is we might automatically enroll people into pension, but if they are young workers or don't have a lot of liquidity for a down payment to buy a house, this young worker might actually be having money into a pension and then engage into a more expensive and riskier mortgage because they don't have the down payment for a mortgage. Similarly, we might limit, for example, credit card debt because we think it's too high, and of course people might then borrow using alternative form of borrowing. And you might not look at that or understand that this happens if you only look at one decision and you say, well, I've changed the credit card law and I see that credit card debt has decreased. But what about the other component of their balance sheet? This is kind of a common theme. Of course, we don't have a clear answer to this question, but I really do want to put it on the table, and I really want to argue that I think that's why it's so important to do financial education. Helping people in educating them and giving them some tool actually might help them in a variety of decisions. I also want to turn to simply and briefly to an important point, which is, but who has a lower debt knowledge? And I'm reporting here this graph across age, and just to tell you that this is actually similar for every of the questions we have asked, and is a finding we have in almost every survey I've looked about financial literacy, which is if you look at the older population, people 65 and older, they are always those with the lower amount of knowledge. Of course, we cannot distinguish whether it is an age or a cohort effect. Are these people just, is their knowledge decaying with age? Is this kind of capability? Or is it that these people lived in a generations where this decision or credit card were not as pervasive? What you see here is certainly a much lower correct answer and much, much high proportion of the do not know. Very interestingly, and the reason why I'm really worried about this group is this is the group that rank themselves the highest in terms of financial knowledge. And that's what really makes them an ideal target for scam. These are the group that know the least. They actually think they know the most, and they have the wealth. If there is a group I think I would really be worried most about are the elderly, and this is a common finding in all of the survey I've looked at.